Hey Niall, it's Mark. Here's a quick explanation of how to solve this problem using that method you posted. So here's the original equation, and then here it is in a matrix format, where, as you know, we have the x, y, and z of each one, x, y, z, x, y, z, and times x, y, z equals the first value, second value, and third value. And it's sometimes easier to write out with like a little line down here. So you have 6, 6, negative 6, 12, and so on. And to solve this problem, what we want to do is we want to manipulate all these equations so that we end up with a diagonal of 1's, and the rest are going to be 0's. And when we do that, whatever's left over on the right-hand side is going to be our value of x, y, and z. And the way we're able to do this is that if you have an equation, kind of any equation, ABC equals XYZ, we can change these equations as long as we multiply or subtract or add or divide each side of the equation with the same value. Then we don't change the actual equation. So for example, if we have a number C and we multiply it times ABC, as long as we multiply the same thing on the right-hand side, we don't change the equation. Same if we, add or subtract, or if we divide, as long as we do the same side to both the equations. So up here, if we have this value, this equation here, I can actually add and subtract these equations together, because the left-hand side and the right-hand side are always equal. So I can, for example, I can multiply the second equation by 12, and I can take this negative 10 and multiply it by the left-hand side, and everything just still stays equal. So that's kind of the concept. So from there, you got to start just kind of messing around with it. And I like just to kind of do an order. There's a lot of tricks in here. You can make this really simple, actually, with 2 or 3 steps, but I'll kind of do it the long way. And so I typically do, I kind of do it by each column. I want this to be, turn this to a 1, then I'll turn this to a 0, then I'll turn this to a 0, and I'll be done with that row, or that column. Then I'll start up here, and I'll try to make this a 0, make this a 1, make this a 0, and then I'll come over here and try to make this a 0, make this a 0, and make this a 1. And when I finally reach the end here, then whatever values are left here are the values of x, y, and z. Okay, so the first thing I do a simplification step here. With the 6's and the 12's, I can divide by 6, and I can come up with a new equation. So 6 divided by 6 is 1, 6 divided by 6 is 1, negative 6 divided by 6 is negative 1, 12 divided by 6 is 2. So that's the first thing I did, just to kind of simplify the equation. And notice when I do that, I get the 1. So I didn't have to do anything too fancy. I just divided by 6 to convert this first element here to a 1. Okay, the next thing I want to do is I'm going to convert this 3 to a 0. And what I can do, if I take this row and I subtract it, I subtract either row 1 or row 3 3 times, then I can get, I'll take this 3 and I'll convert one of these to a 3 and subtract it, and it'll work. So notice here, this equation has a 2 on the right-hand side. So if I multiply this times 3, I also have to multiply the right-hand side times 3. So either would work, but because that's a 40 times 3, that's a big number. I don't want to deal with that. But here we have this top row. I can multiply this times 3, and it's pretty easy. So if I show you the work here, so here's the original row 2, and here's the row 1, and I'm going to multiply it times 3. And what will happen is I'll get my row 2, which is going to be 3, negative 1, 1, negative 10, minus 3 times row 1 is going to give me 0, negative 4, 4, negative 16. And immediately I notice that's divisible by 4. So I'm going to end up with a 0, -1, 1, -4. And I'm going to put that back into my little matrix here. I'll finish drawing my line. And so now I've converted this 3 to a 0 because I subtracted the equations. So now I have 0, -1, 1, -4. Okay, so the next step, then I'm going to go to this final row in column 1, and I'm going to convert that to a 0. So again, I got to figure out, okay, if I take row 3 and subtract it from row 1, so I'm going to get a 1 minus a 1, it's going to make that a 0. And of course, the rest of the stuff doesn't really matter. It'll all work out. So here I have my original row, because I'll call this row 3 minus row 1. That's row 3, row 1. I subtract 1 minus 1 is 0. 1 minus a -4 is going to be 1 plus 4, so it's 5. -1 minus a 2 is a -3. And 2 minus a -40 is going to be, 2 plus 40, so that's 42. So that's going to be my new row 3, and now I go back to my equation. You see now I have my 1, 0, 0. Okay, from there, now I'm going to go to my next column. I want to make this a 0, this a 1, and this a 0. So I'm going to start with this. And you notice if I say, okay, if I take row 1 and add row 2, this and this will cancel out, and that'll give me a 0 here as a result. So here I have my row 1, and here I have my row 2. I'm just going to add them together. 1 plus 0 is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. -1, so on and so forth. And I get my new value for row 3. And it's convenient that actually this all cancels out right here. So I'm not going to have to do this again. Row 1 now is finished because I have a 1, 0, 0. Okay, next one I have 0, -1. So now I want to convert either this to a 1, but actually what I did when I solved that, I made this into a 0. So I'm going to have 0, -1, 0. And I do that by basically taking, this is going to be a little confusing, but I have 5 times row 2 plus row 3. And if I do that, so here I kind of multiply this out, so I show it, and so this is the same as this, and I add it together, I get a 0, 0, 2, 22, and 2 and 22 are divisible by 2, so that's equal to 0, 0, 1, 11. So that gives me my new third row, 0, 0, 1, 11. And so the only thing left I have, I need to convert this to a 0 and this to positive 1. And there's a number of ways I could do that, but what I did is I said, okay, I'm just going to say, let's take row 2 and subtract row 3, and I'll get a 0, -1, 0, -15. And then I'm like, oh, I got a -1 and a -15, so I'm going to make that positive by multiplying both times -1. So it gives me a 0, 1, 0, 15. And now you're over here, and I have my solved matrix. So I have my X, Y, and my Z. All right, hope that helps. Sorry it's kind of long and boring. See you.